During the 1980s and 1990s, Peru experienced one of the darkest periods in its history. Terrorism is the result of the spread of extremist ideologies, and Peruvians have experienced it firsthand. How is it possible that this evil has spread so much? Are you interested in revisiting this painful episode that remains in the collective memory of Peru? Go ahead. Then stay until the end of the video. And since we're talking about my country, I invite you to watch this video for my secondary channel Political Map, where we will talk about the upcoming elections. I leave you the link in the description. As always, let's go back to the background. In this case, to the 1960s, in the midst of the Cold War between the capitalist and communist blocs, Peru, like most countries in the region, was aligned with the United States. The then first government of Fernando Belaunde opted for a policy of free trade and encouragement of private investment. That is, contrary to the socialist ideal. Thus, the first guerrilla groups emerged, such as the revolutionary left movement led by the aprista Luis de la Puente Ucheda, and inspired by successful social revolutions, such as the one that occurred in Cuba. Due to their inexperience, the MIR was defeated in 1965, the same fate suffered by other groups such as the National Liberation Army, a group that received military training from Cuba. Belaunde is overthrown in 1968 by a coup led by General Juan Velasco Alvarado, who establishes the Revolutionary Government of the Armed Force, a military regime with socialist self-management. That is, a moderate socialism like that of Tito's Yugoslavia. These leftist measures are further softened after the rise to power of Francisco Morales Bermudez, with a new coup, the remembered Tacnazo. Due to the stagnation of economic growth of the revolutionary process, the new military leader chose to correct some policies of his predecessor, while blaming the radical left for this stagnation. So he proposed to banish its influence in the government. In general terms, the military regime had lost a lot of popularity, and the gap between the poor and the rich continued to be abysmal. Thus, in the last phase of his government, the then political group Shining Path, founded by philosophy professor Abimael Guzman, established a base at the National University of San Cristobal de Huamanga, Ayacucho. From here, he would begin to spread his Maoist ideals among the youth. That is, they appealed to the vindication of the working class in the country, and that the peasantry could become a revolutionary force capable of mobilizing. The goal of Abimael Guzman, to establish a Maoist socialist state in Peru. The way the armed guerrillas struggle, instead of participating in the 1980 elections. Thus, the day before the elections, Shining Path perpetrates its first armed action, burning the electoral urns in the town of Chuchi, Ayacucho. Guzman, who would be nicknamed Comrade Gonzalo, chose to wage his war in the style of Mao Zedong, opening guerrilla areas to overthrow state authorities and create liberated zones that support conquering new territories. First, the struggle in the countryside and then to the cities. In the political aspect, Belaunde secures a second term after the elections, and his liberal-leaning democratic policy led to Sendero being able to gain more followers who join their cause. Thus, Sendero initially extends to the north of Ayacucho after perpetrating new attacks, thanks to the support of international organizations such as the Colombian FARC, government response, declaration of a state of emergency in 1982, and the consequent intervention of the armed forces. Thus, from 1983 there is an escalation in violence, mainly in the rural areas of Ayacucho. During the following months, attacks are perpetrated in the cities of Huancavelica, Pasco, Huánuco, Abanque, and Junín. Here, the attacks on high-voltage lines stand out, causing constant blackouts and leaving entire cities without supply. The infamous car bombs were also the order of the day, even in the capital, Lima. In 1984, a new terrorist group emerged known as the Tupac Amaru Revolutionary Movement, with some members from the old MIR and with Victor Pole Campos as its leader and founder. Unlike Sendero, where an almost equal number of men and women participated, the MRTA wore uniforms, and due to some ideological differences, both organizations fought each other at times. And speaking of uniforms, that was the big problem with Sendero Luminoso. the difficulty in identifying them. Some agents of the terrorist group could pose as peasants or street vendors. That's why tragedies like the Acamarca massacre occurred during the early days of Alan Garcia's government, where an army patrol wiped out an entire village and were subsequently accused of human rights violations and abuse of authority. For their part, Sendero also perpetrated massacres like the one in Uchuracay, in the province of Huanta, and Lunamarca, in Huancazancos, which led some community members who initially supported them to distance themselves and participate in the so-called peasant patrols, autonomous defense groups in the rural areas of Peru. Starting from 1986, Sendero Luminoso managed to expand through the departments of La Libertad, Lambayeque, Ancash, Piura, Cajamarca, Ucayali, and Loreto, in addition to committing constant attacks in the capital, Lima. In 1987, the paramilitary group Commando Rodrigo Franco was formed, which was questioned for its threats and extrajudicial executions. On the other hand, the government of Alan Garcia ended in a severe crisis in which the Peruvian economy fell by up to 12%, with an inflation of 10,500%. The desperation caused by this economic debacle is capitalized by Sendero, who exacerbates the crisis with the use of more car bombs in the cities. By March of 1989, Comrade Gonzalo begins the era of strategic balance, suggesting that Sendero was now on par with the Peruvian forces affected by the economic and political crisis. In 1990, Alberto Fujimori comes to power, the same year that the controversial armed group, Grupo Colina, is created, which committed new attacks against erroneous terrorist leaders. These include the Barrios Altos and La Cantuta massacres, remembered for their atrocities. In other parts of Peru, Sendero perpetrates what some call the Ashaninka Holocaust, an Amazonian ethnic group that lost about 10,000 members at the hands of the terrorists. In Lima, Sendero infiltrated through the so-called young towns like those of Villa Salvador, where the anti-Sendero leader Maria Elena Moyano was murdered. The most representative attacks in the capital were on the Frecuencia Latina channel and on Tarada Street. As for President Fujimori, in 1992, he carried out the memorable self-coup in which he dissolved Congress with the backing of the armed forces to establish an emergency government, an act that most people considered dictatorial. This is where the great influence of his advisor Vladimir Montesinos comes into play, and the formulation of a new strategy for the fight against terrorism. This consisted of focusing efforts on capturing the leaders of subversive organizations, which allowed him to gradually reduce terrorist actions throughout the country. The GEN, National Police Intelligence Unit, participated in this endeavor, successfully locating several high-ranking terrorists. On September 12, 1992, Operation Victoria took place, in which the leader Abimael Guzman was finally captured, who was in a house in the district of Circuillo, Lima, forcing him to present a peace agreement to be subsequently sent to prison. This marked the beginning of the decline of terrorism in Peru. Thus, the subversives began to lose ground in the interior of the country, where the peasant patrols did their part. As for the MRTA, their forces were decimated after the recapture of Pole Campos in 1992. However, his successor, Nestor Serpa Cartolini, stormed the residence of the Japanese ambassador in Lima in December 1996 during a social event. The insurgents remained for more than 4 months guarding the hostages while demanding the release of 462 members of the MRTA. Thus, Operation Chavin de Huantar took place, considered one of the most successful military rescue operations in history. In it, the 14 terrorists, including Serpa Cartolini, were killed, and all the hostages, except one, were able to emerge unscathed from this event. This represented the end of the MRTA. The defeat of Sendero Luminoso, on the other hand, is associated with the capture of Abimael Guzman's successor, Oscar Ramirez Duran, better known as Comrade Feliciano, near Huancayo in May 1999. Despite this, Sendero continued to operate until November 2000, when the definitive defeat of terrorism in Peru is considered. In 2001, then-President Valentin Paniagua founded the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, with the aim of preparing a report on the terrorism experienced in Peru, a time when almost 70,000 people had died or disappeared. That is, the deadliest event in the country's history after the 1970 Ancash earthquake. So far, of course. And although Shining Path and MRTA have been defeated, to this day there is still a narco-terrorist insurgency operating in the Braham, Valley of the Rivers, Apurimac, Een and Mandaro, where former members of both organizations who have received support from the Colombian FARC are dedicated to this illegal activity. This conflict is not free of controversy, especially because of the government of Alberto Fujimori. While some continue to thank him for the defeat of terrorism that occurred during his term, others accuse him of being responsible for the various attacks and disappearances of the civilian population unrelated to the terrorist groups. Be that as it may, the truth is that this dark episode is living proof that all extremism must be eradicated. What is your opinion about the management of the controversial leader? Don't forget to leave your comment, and if you like this video, support me with a like and subscribe to my channel. You can also follow me on my social networks, and if you are interested in supporting this project, any donation on Patreon, where we can talk about history, will be welcome. In addition, you can find exclusive content on my platform, elmapadekbaz.tv. Until next time, thank you.